All right,
Okay, we got a few people on here already. Hello, everybody. We're just getting things a little organized. Sorry for the slight delay. Mac Nonsense. Hey,
hey,
welcome.
I remember Mac nonsense.
That's right. And this new one is Zygillus Zygillus I think is how it's pronounced. I'm not sure.
I'm gonna
um,
have to go through commercials before I see what's going on Twitch.
right, sure.
So we'll give it just a second for people to come on. We're live on Facebook, YouTube, and Float, and um, and on Twitch channel for
Title
Stevens.
Photoshop and oops, can't put the wrong symbol in there. I'm typing what I broadcast about. And Photomatix, I forgot to do that.
If you're
Integration,
if you're watching on if you're watching on Twitch,
right?
I'm looking to see where I can get your the comments on your Twitch channel so I can keep track of those as well. If you're
Yeah, you just have to bring that up into another browser.
Yeah, I get that. If people are commenting on the Photomatix channel, then I'll get the comments. We can pop them up on the screen. But we'll play around with that. We have a little time, so we'll play around with that a little bit. But for anybody watching here on the Photomatix channel, we're here with Stephen Burns. He's with the San Diego Photoshop, the Adobe Photoshop user group, San Diego. Popular author, educator, fine artist, and as I learned recently, really great speaker and teacher online here. We did something on your channel last weekend, right?
Yeah.
And a really good group watching, good commenters and conversations. So I thought let's go the other way. Have Stephen come on and show us some of his workflow that involves Photomatix and Photoshop together. And it's going to be a lot of Stephen kind of taking it away, and I'll try to keep up with questions coming up from viewers.
Yeah,
So we can.
definitely you'll keep it the questions on viewers. I can see that. I can see their StreamYard here. Yeah, I can see them. Well, I'll keep up with the Twitch people. You keep up with the StreamYard people.
Right, sounds good. And well, Streamyard is the in between. Anybody watching on YouTube or Facebook, that's what we'll see it. That'll be the StreamYard is Facebook and YouTube. Go ahead and shoot your questions and comments, and we'll grab them as we go. You can see let's see. We can see some of your work on your Behance page, right
Yeah,
here.
sure. You
And I
can go to
I
the
could actually
Behance
share that.
page.
Let me try to share that actually.
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay.
Let me handle that one. So let me
All right.
go over to there we go. And what I will do is I'm gonna pull this over to here, pull that over there so I can see it at the same time. Okay. All right. So well, welcome everybody. Steve Burns here from chromeillusion.com. Let me show you my website first. Give you an idea of who I am. I call myself more of a digital fine artist. I'm also an author and instructor. I teach um, at Golden West College as well as Santa Monica College. And so I've been teaching for almost 20 something years. I think 25 years or so. It's been a long time. So, and basically, I teach in the graphics, more the digital imaging department. So I do a lot of the beginning through advanced Photoshop classes, the intro to game design classes. I've done some After Effects courses. So I'm pretty well rounded in terms of utilizing a variety of software packages together, which we're going to actually attempt to do today. So we're going to talk about Photoshop and Photomatix. Now, on my website, you get there, chromeillusion.com, okay? And you should see it in the chat box. You should have placed it in the chat box so you guys have access to it. You can kind of go check me out at your leisure. And if you go to my books and DVDs for starters, go over to the book section, a little book link here. My latest book's the 3D Photoshop for Creative Professional. I'm very much, my career path started off as a photographer. So I went to school for photography. I went through the whole photographic program. We got my certificate. From there, I went professional as professional photographer. And this was in the late 80s, early 90s. So I'm using the large format camera, the 4x5 camera, because at that day and time, the commercial industry only accepted color 4x5 transparencies. So I worked out of a small studio, did a lot of effects photography, a lot of corporate brochures, a lot of food photography, architecture. I mean, just name it. That's what you had to do as a professional photographer. But my real love was working with the fine art of photography, and I'll share some of that to you in just with you guys in just a little bit.
Do you want
Here
to
are the
tell
books.
Do you want to tell everyone what transparencies means?
All right,
Not
sure.
everybody's as old as us out there.
Oh, that, you know what? That's a good point. So everybody will know the term color slides from back in the day where we used to shoot film. Remember film? So
You had to sit around a slide projector to watch someone's vacation photos.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So what I would do is with film, well, most of us shot 35 millimeter color slide film. My clients required 4x5, so 35 millimeter slide film. I'm using my little hand right here, looking at it's like that big. But 4x5 inch, it's literally 4x5 inch film this big. So we put the film backs because they were loaded into individual film backs that only took 2 sheets of film, one for the front and the back, and one for the back end. And we used one of those little bellows cameras where you put the sheet over your head and you look through and photograph. So that was what the commercial industry required in that day, because if they ever wanted to take your shot and take your food shot or your product shot and blow it up on a billboard out in the street somewhere, then you've got the resolution to handle it. So that was a camera I used quite a bit. I was experienced with a lot of different types of cameras, and we'll talk about cameras and exposures. They all do the same thing. We're in the digital world now. Back in film, we always had this concept called bracketing, right? Okay, so in case your first shot didn't get the exposure right, you took one stop under and one stop over just to ensure that you were going to get that shot, because time is money, and
you didn't know until later, much
right,
later.
you didn't know till later. I mean, the more experience as you get as a photographer, you start to know your camera and know your lighting, so you become very confident as to what you get. But yeah, essentially you couldn't waste time because they were under deadline. They couldn't, a client could never waste time on a reshoot, right?
Right.
So back in the day, we used Polaroid film. Now with the 4x5 camera, I had a separate Polaroid back that slid into the little film compartment. And when I took the shot, that Polaroid told me exactly what my exposure was going to be, what it was going to look like exposed. So nowadays we have the beauty of the LCD visuals in the back of our camera. Right. So that in itself is the very thing that eliminated the Polaroid company. So we no longer needed that film. But let's get back to my website here. You guys can come through here and take a look at this. You can see the books that I've written. And if you go to the galleries up here at the very top, you'll see this gallery 1 through 7. If you click on them, you get to see some of the artwork that I do with Photoshop. Okay. So my love has always been the fine art of expressing myself or expressing myself emotionally, utilizing my digital tools. So if we go over to Gallery 7, you get to see some of the newer work, a little more interesting. But come in here, take a look at it, and you can contact me easily through the website as well. Now, let me go over to Behance. And Behance, if you have Adobe's products like Photoshop or anything, you have Behance. Behance is basically Facebook for artists. So let's go over to Behance here. And here is my Behance account. So behance.net. Now, for those of you who are watching me on Twitch, I will just place this little link right down in there as well. Okay, there we go.
Someone asked, "What's the link for the Twitch Photomatix
For the
Pro?"
photo.
Oh, the link for the is that for the talk we did before?
Oh, that's the
That's
one. Now you have. I sent that link to you.
yeah.
Um,
Somebody was asking in the comments. I can answer it. Yeah.
okay,
If
cool.
that if
All
that's
right.
what you meant, if that's what you meant, IB Wizard. But didn't IB Wizard watch us?
Yeah,
That remind.
Ivy Wizard is the gentleman who helps me run the Facebook Photoshop users group.
Ah, okay.
Right. So,
Yeah, you
and
should
I did,
mention
and
your group there too, right? The
yeah. So let's see if let me take a look at this very closely. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So you have. I sent that link to the Photoshop users group yesterday, so he should have it.
okay.
Just saying.
I'm just saying.
All right.
Let's see.
Let me grab this.
I can
My
track that down
water
too.
here because I'm going to get very thirsty. All right, so Behance. This you guys get to see a variety of things that I do as a digital artist. There's some of the 3D printing that I do. I'll show you the photography in just one moment. Digital painting. I'll kind of click on the digital painting and share with you guys kind of some of the things I'm into. So I'm always talking about. I like to work in values. We're going to talk a lot about values today. Values being your black and white information. So after I get a quick drink of water here, we'll.
I'm kind of mirroring you over here on the other ones. Oh, here he is. The the walking photo. Cool.
All right. So I like to work in black and white shades. So those who are avid photographers know who Ansel Adams is. So he's the man that actually established the foundations of gaining depth in our images. So our workflow as photographers, especially black and white photographers, come from the master painters, come from the master sculptors. All right. Working in values that establishes the depth and detail in our imagery. All right. So even when I do digital paintings, like some of the ones I'm sharing with you here, I always start working with a black and white image to establish that detail and that depth. Now, everything that I'm talking about now is going to relate to HDR. Um, I figured I wanted to share kind of a little bit of a foundational philosophical approach to working with HDR so that it gives you a better understanding as to how to start manipulating your particular work. All right, let's get out of here real quick. So if we go to my photography, and I'm going to share more of this with you later. All right. So I love taking trips out of town. One of my favorite places is Death Valley. I also do workshops for the Central Coast. I do workshops for Yosemite. I do workshops for Joshua Tree as well, and I take photographers out there so we can learn, take them to a place that's going to inspire them to um, create, improve their to improve their portfolio. Now, I'm using HDR on everything. I do not like my work looking like HDR. Now, one of the bad habits that, in my opinion, that I see out there with utilizing the HDR technique is that it looks almost as if you applied a filter to it. That is not what I'm trying to achieve. If you're going to master your tones, your imagery, I don't feel you're trying to achieve that filter like effect. The idea is you want to achieve control over the details in your shadows, midtones, and highlights. I'm going to constantly talk about this because even when I was going to school for photography, that was the very thing our instructors just drilled into us. Even from photo 101 in the darkroom, it was all about making sure that you could have details in your shadows, details in the midtones, and details in the highlights, but at the same time you want to look sharp and snappy, so to speak, right? So you want detail that was expressive in your photographic imagery.
Deliberate detail.
Yeah, So we kind of go through here now. When I create, my eye is to look at something and look at it as if it's almost an abstraction, because being expressive in my work is actually the most important thing. It's not recreating what I saw, it's recreating an emotion. That's what separates fine art work from commercial work, is that commercial work is selling a product. Your fine art work is you're expressing something inside your soul, your heart, the feelings, the emotion. You want the viewer to connect with it the way that you connected with it emotionally. Another example of a shot from Death Valley, and I'll share. I'm gonna come back to these as well, because um, if you see here, most of the time if somebody used HDR, you would see a lot of detail in the shadow areas, because you have the ability to pull open, or I should say, let me say it this way: because you have the ability to open up those shadows, don't mean that you should,
Yes, very much.
right? Because think of the shadows as the bass in a musical score, right? That bass catapults the other tones, to treble and the other various tones within the orchestrated within the orchestra, so that it creates a three-dimensional um, a, a scene or a sound, right? The idea is to get a three-dimensional photo or a three-dimensional expression out of something that's two-dimensional, and that's going to lie within the values. Let's go take a look at another one. Here's another example. The goal is to give you the tools to control the details in the shadows, in some of the mid-tone areas, and the highlights. Your job as an artist is to push those values in such a direction that it guides your viewers around guides your viewer's eye in and around your photograph, to produce that emotional connection, right? So working in black and white is not easy.
But
Okay,
I
so
like what you mentioned this one other time we were talking, that controlling it in black and white has a lot of benefit to your color image. That if you work on it without the saturation,
that's
and
right,
you're working in black and white.
which I'm going to share today.
Great.
Okay, so as photographers, we have gotten some bad habits. Why? Most of us have not gone to school for this.
Right.
Most of us has achieved our education through YouTube on the web. So your real education is very scattered. So I'm going to try to take us back to something more foundational, so that it gives you a solid base to work from, so that you can start looking at your scene through your camera differently. Start looking at it with a system of values, black and white information. So let's go to the next image here real quick. See, even in color, if we learn to honor the values, we can achieve some real depth in our work. Okay. Um,
Tell us more about values. Well, how you're defining it.
all right. In fact, I prefer not to tell you. I prefer to show you.
I was hoping you'd say that.
Okay. I'm definitely going to show you. Um, we're visual art. Our job is visual, right? We're artists. We're visual creatures. All right. We need to see the connect. We need to see it to understand. All right. Because we can open up the shadows, once again, doesn't mean that we should. Because by opening up this shadow, you lose the connection to the depth of the piece. Okay.
Yeah, I've
So
heard.
you want the piece to take on its own character, its own mood, And what produces mood the best? It's going to be black and white values, right?
Yeah, people say shadow. You know, I consider that shadows are used to define. So that can be in lines, or that can be part of the guiding the eye through the image to the brighter areas, etc. And one of the things that I think people make a mistake with, and certainly with me, is recovering too much shadows with HDR. I think that's what you're pointing out, and then you get a flat image and it's kind of boring. And then, but the fact is that you have the option. You can control where you want your shadows and how much detail you want to recover or not.
That's exactly correct. Exactly correct. So when most people grab the HDR program, they start producing what they think is an acceptable photograph because they're getting almost like this filter type of an effect because it's pulling out all this detail of the shadows, midtones, and highlights. And what does that do to your image? It makes it flat. It makes it boring. There's no rhythm. There's no three dimensionality to it, right?
Yeah. So the excitement of the new toy of being able to recover everything is great, but then we got to remember that we're making images.
That's right. That's exactly right. So the idea is that we as the artists, our job is to create, go beyond what God has already created. How many times have we see as that we hear from other photographers that, well, that's the way it actually looked. Well, that's not our job as artists to make it look the way it actually looked. Our job as artists is to go beyond what you actually saw, make it more expressive from what God originally created.
And God also gave us these two eyes instead of one lens. So it's a different. If you're making it look, if you're making it look like it really looked,
Right.
then the part of the challenge is to use your shadows to define that depth.
That's right. And that's part of our skill sets. In terms,
God or Mother Nature, however you want to look at it.
well, that's part of skill sets and understanding that the lens is one dimensional, right? Or two dimensional. It's two dimensional. Our eyes are three dimensional.
Right.
So your habit in framing the shot should be close one eye and put your hands up like the frame, like this, right?
Yeah.
And frame your scene. So when you close one eye, now you start to get closer to what the camera sees,
Right.
which is going to help you a little bit
Right.
in establishing your shot. Okay, so IB Witch is saying much better. Good, good, good. Very good. Okay, good. Okay, so I said, okay, so IB Wizard made a comment on Twitch that he knows a person that thinks that the white halo of HDR looks nice. Well, I'm gonna say right now, no, it doesn't.
I know a person that thinks the white halo of HDR looks nice.
Right. So when you get
Sign.
separate, right, you get, see the separations of tones where the HDR program manipulates the shadows and the highlights that are right next to each other to such a point or such an extreme that you get these halo effects around the shaded areas of your image. That's what you don't want to have.
And that falls into, if that's part of the art that you're creating and it works for that, then great. I mean, there's nothing wrong. They I guess I hear mostly from my position as and Ron, by the way, IB Wizard, the is so many, and me included, doing things like architecture, real estate, virtual tour stuff. We're going for realism, so
Right.
we don't look for that. But yeah, either there are, that is one of the benefits of HDR and Photomatix, is there's just so many options. There's so much you can do with it. And
Right.
one of the things that's a little bit too bad out there is most people think of it as one or the other, and
Right.
a lot of people think of it as this wild, artsy stuff, and it doesn't have to be. It can be, and doesn't have to be.
Okay. Now here's another example. I'm going into my latest imagery, and unfortunately, because I have three monitors on my system, when I hit the space bar in Bridge, it doesn't fill the screen here. So I'm going to just make it big, like this.
We need to get your screen, sharing your screen on the with on the need to get you sharing your screen so we can follow you. I've been kind of mirroring you, but
Oh, you've been mirroring me? Oh, I'm not sharing my screen. Ron, I thought I was. Well,
on
you
the
did,
StreamYard.
yeah, you didn't tell me that I wasn't sharing. Well, let me go get it. Let's see. Let's go get StreamYard. Let's go share my screen to them. Let me see. I think this is should be it there. Nope. Give me a hot moment. And I'm looking for my StreamYard screen, which is here somewhere. Okay, let me click this one here. Maybe that's it. Ah, it's weird. Not finding it for some reason. I know I'm there because you can hear and see me.
We're getting right to that, Paul. Paul says, cut down on the philosophy and get down to techniques.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. We're getting there. Somebody's
we're
impatient.
we're having a casual Thursday. Some people like to call it a casual little Friday. And
Yeah, let's go ahead and share my screen. Well, see, I feel sorry for those guys. I thought I was sharing my screen so that you guys can actually see what I'm talking to you guys.
you were sharing it on the Twitch, and I had it on, and I
Not
had
on.
it.
Okay,
There
cool.
we go.
So
Now I got
give
to
me,
take. Now I see the infinity us on there.
all right. So what do I need to do? Move this out of the way.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. There you go.
Okay. All right. So
So
that's what.
I'll full screen you,
Yeah,
and
that's screaming.
Paul and everybody else can dive into the one and only Stephen Burns.
And I apologize again. That was why Paul had made that comment, is because he wasn't seeing what I was philosophizing about.
No, he was.
Of course, you were.
I
Okay,
was
good.
showing what you were showing. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So yeah. So I'm looking at this, and I'm going to go into Photomatix. I'm going to kind of talk about what it's doing. All right. So it's all about the values. Now I want to explain it to you this way. Okay. Let me get. We're going to get into Photomatix just a little bit, but I need you guys to understand some good little workflows for yourself that you can work immediately in understanding what I'm talking about. I'm going to go grab an image. Let's go ahead and I'm going to grab this one right here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and open this up in Photoshop and hit Command R, which is going to open this into Adobe Camera Raw. Okay. Now we're looking at the image as my camera has captured it. My camera is a Canon 5D Mark II, 22 megapixel full frame sensor. Okay. Kind of zoom in a little bit, and you can see the detail that exists in there. All of my sliders over here are at 0. Now, I'm going to share with you how I want you guys to think and how I would like you guys to start working. And that I need you guys to understand that color is your enemy. Okay? Color is your enemy.
Ooh, them's fighting words.
Yeah, those are fighting words, right? And I mean it. When I went to school for photography,
I know where you're going with this, but I just thought I would
well, you
say
know,
what probably other people are thinking right now.
okay, so don't spoil it for me.
Okay. I won't.
Okay. All right. So color is your enemy. In that we haven't learned to capture the depth yet. The details. The details and the depth is not, and I say it again, it is not in your color. All right, make Command 0. That's going to pop it to full screen view. You'll notice that everything's zeroed out. Nothing has been adjusted. The first thing I'm going to do, which is the first thing you should always do when you're working with your HDR images, is you're going to go to your optics and you're going to remove your chromatic. You're going to remove chromatic aberration, and all that is doing is making sure that all your red, green, and blue, cyan, magenta, and yellow light is in registration, so that you're going to get the best detailed and sharpest detail that you can from your photograph. and then use profile correction. These are lens corrections. It automatically recognized from my metadata that I'm using a Canon, and the lens was an EF100, and the Canon was a 5D Mark II. So it knows. So Adobe has created algorithms to correct for those lenses. Now, lenses are not perfect. Some lenses bow a little more. Some lenses will flatten things a little too much. So what this does is it helps correct that image. All right, now we're going to go to the top. Now let's talk about this color is your enemy. When you're looking at color, you don't see depth. Okay? When you're working with color, you do not see depth. You mistaken the depth in your image, or that three-dimensionality in your image. You mistaken the color as producing and providing that. It doesn't. All right, so before I do anything, let me do this. I'm going to duplicate this file so we can see it side by side. I'm going to hit Command C, Command V. There we go. Now they're side by side here. And I'm going to go ahead and Command R, open this up into Adobe Camera Raw. Okay, again. So after I had went in to deal with the optics, right? And as we see this little eyeball that's highlighted next to optics, which means that we actually applied something to it. I'm going to go up to the Basics tab and open that up. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of that thing that's hampering us, right? And that thing that's hampering us are the hues or the colors. So if I slide down here to the bottom, now if you take a look at this, Adobe has organized this. Let's talk about why Adobe did things the way they did. Adobe intended for you to work in color. So the first thing, they wanted to work from the top down. So they gave you color, temperature, and tint to balance out any type of problems with incandescent light or fluorescent light. It was a means of balancing your whites so that your whites are pure white, which is what this is called, the white balance sliders, right? And then Adobe, after you adjusted your white balance, they want you to come down and correct your contrast and your highlight. And then they want you to come in here and give it more saturation, more color according to your personal liking, right? All right, I'm going to tell you that's the wrong way to work. What you should be doing is this: getting rid of the color from the get-go. Go to your saturation slider and pull it out completely to the left and get rid of the color. So if I hit Command plus to kind of zoom in a little closer, you get to see that this image lacks depth, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, it lacks depth. So
And by the way, just real quick,
sure.
just moving the saturation slider all the way down is, for what Steven's going to do here, is a lot different than working in the black and white section.
That's exactly correct. So you are not to work in the black and white section. Work with the color section, which is your basics tab.
Yeah, 'cause you can go black and white. Adobe keeps changing it, but you can just even go black and white above there, and it changes. Is that the right terminology? Is it a section?
Right. Exactly. but if you do it that way, it doesn't allow you to come back to add the color.
Right. So I just wanted to head that one off at the pass.
Right. Somebody can say, well, why can't you just do it the black and white way? Well, it's pretty obvious. You're not allowed to reintroduce your color again. So we want the ability to produce our values and then bring back the color. All right. So we're looking at this image. I'm going to get in a little closer, zoom in a little closer, and immediately you can see that this is pretty flat. We look at our values here. We've got kind of a dark gray for this outline of our subject. And then we have almost a medium gray right next to it, a lighter gray right next to it. There aren't any real solid blacks or whites. I'm just looking, as an artist, I'm looking at the image and I can tell It's not really a white or a black. And then what confirms that for me? This histogram right here. It shows you there are no blacks here and there are no whites. And then the higher levels of grays, there are none there. So it's confirming that through the histogram.
So
So
nothing is burned out or
nothing is
lost in the
burned out,
shadows.
nothing is blocked up. Everything is pretty much right in the middle, most of it. A little higher on this little brighter gray, but there are no whites, there are no blacks here, right? So my job as an artist is to produce what? A rich black with detail. Keep that in mind. That's important what I'm telling you here. And a rich black with detail. So what we've got is this dark gray with no detail. There's detail in there. Well, how do we get it out? Let's talk about these sliders. And we're going to talk about them not from the standpoint as Adobe meant you to learn them, but we're going to talk about them from the standpoint of what you as a digital artist, your education as a digital artist is going to change how you look at your photography. Let me explain it to you this way. If you're going to do a painting, right? What is the first thing that you do? You draw it out, the outline it with a pencil, right? What color is that pencil? It's a value. It's a
Probably
dark
black,
value, right?
close to black.
Right, close to black, depending on the pencil you use, number 2 or whatever. Or graphite. So what is the next thing you do after you actually make that line drawing?
Shade.
That's where you start to shade it.
I'm guessing I'm not a painter.
That's right. That's right. You actually create shading, right?
Mhm.
Well, what is that shading doing for you? That's producing the depth, the three-dimensionality. And you produce those rich blacks, those wonderful midtones, and those creamy whites with detail before you even touch the color. The problem with us as photographers is that our medium, which is the digital camera, gives us color from the get-go. Therefore, we get into a bad habit of working with color all the time.
Mhm.
So,
In,
yeah,
in fact, as a someone that's straddling what you're talking about, my education comes around the same time that yours was, but still not as in a serious way at that time. Anyway, point is, when sometimes if you need one of those little, as a photographer, you get in a rut a little bit and you need to kind of reset a little somehow. And a great way to go is just to go back to black and white,
that's right.
because the color changes composition so much. It's so involved in a composition that if you just start thinking in black and white and line and design that way, it's a great way to kind of stop and reset again. So I love what I love the philosophizing side that you're doing because it
Oh, it,
reminds us of what the basis of all this is, with all these wonderful tools and cameras and frankly spectacular cameras built into phones now. We get a lot of this gets lost, and we like if you shoot enough, you're going to get some good shots, whether it's luck or persistence or both. But Stephen, this guy's talking about very deliberate design, and so this is really great. Sorry for the interruption. Just thought I would throw that out there.
that's good. That's a very good point. The way you should start thinking is you're going to start thinking abstractly. That's going to really catapult your skill levels. Stop looking at things as something literal and start looking at things abstractly. That's going to help improve how you handle lighting and shading and shadow. Okay. All right. So let me keep going here. This is all going to come to fruition here.
Okay.
So we're looking at our image. These images the tones are fairly close together. That result makes it flat. I need to have a shadow with detail. Once again, detail is that key word. We have a shadow like in here as I kind of pull through image, have shadow-like information, but there's no detail in there. Why? Because there's too much midtone blocking it up, or lower midtone blocking it up, it to be more accurate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the sliders here. We're going to understand what these sliders are doing, and that the exposures is taking the shadows, midtones, and highlights, all three of them, shadows, midtones, and highlights, and making them dark or equally light. Okay, your exposure. And I'm going to just play around with this. I'm going to double click it to reset it back to 0. Contrast avoids your midtone completely. Contrast only targets the shadows or the highlights, and the midtones are never touched. Okay? Contrast is the devil. Don't use it ever. Right? So what it's doing is bringing up the shadows and down the highlights. It's destroying a lot of that valuable midtone information that you need. So don't use it. Keep it at 0. Highlights, however, is ignoring your midtone information and your shadows and targeting only the brighter values. The highlights are good for bringing back detail into those brighter, hot areas of your image. Okay? All right. Shadows, if highlights is targeting the highlights, shadows is simply targeting the shadows. This is where we want to be. Because if I bring the shadows down, it makes them darker. But if I bring them up, it pulls detail out in here. Right? There's my detail is starting to show here a lot better than it used to be. I'm not sure if you guys can see this, but maybe you can see it up here better. Right? So if I pull the shadows down, see, this is where it was at 0. This is where the shadows are now. So we're opening up the shadows so that we can see detail. We may need to see more detail, right? Maybe the shadows all the way to plus 100 is not giving us enough. I wish I had another slider called like turbo shadows, to bring out even more detail. Yeah.
It's probably bringing up artifacts at that and noise at that point too when you pull the shadows all the way up. Usually that's the case.
Possibly. Right? Possibly. If I go to blacks, which is your extreme shadows, the real deep shadows, I can bring them down lower or bring it up a little bit so we can see a little more detail within those shadow areas. Okay, so we're starting to get somewhere here. Now we have some shadows with some detail. As an overall result, what we've got here is what? A really flat image. That's fine. Because I want you guys to think abstractly, right? Stop looking at this as if this is a photograph of a wall with graffiti on it. Look at it in terms of the value system. So if you're going to make a charcoal drawing on the canvas, you're smudging those shades around to create your whatever, whether it's a portrait or a still life, you're smudging those tones around on that canvas. Deeper tones in some areas, brighter tones in other areas, right? Okay, so think about it like that. Okay, so let me turn off my phone here. Good, that's good. So the reason I brought up the shadows and the blacks is to ensure that I can see some detail in here now. Look at this. We couldn't see detail in there before. We can see detail in there now. Now we can see the texture of the wall in the shadows where we could not before, right? And just to prove to you, if I go to shadows and bring it back down, see how it starts to block up a little bit, right? I want to see the detail in there. All right. Okay, so we've dealt with the shadows. Let's look at the highlights real quick. I'm going to hit Control minus just to bring it down a little bit. The highlights, because we hardly have any highlights in here, it looks like we've got some pretty good detail. Now, what I can do is I can pull the highlights down just to see how much more detail I gain. So let me get in closer, okay? And highlights up, highlights down. So I'm gaining a little more detail in here. I'm gonna keep this at 0 for now. Just I can always go back to it later, but for now I'm gonna keep it to 0. The reason is that because I pulled out all the shadow in here, where now we're seeing detail within those darker areas, we need to reproduce or reintroduce deeper, darker values to create that depth, right? How do we do it? Most of you will say, oh, go to the blacks, right? Well, we pulled the blacks up for a reason so that we can gain a little more detail in the shadow. So the blacks aren't going to help you. So this iteration of Adobe Camera Raw that we have today from Adobe is one of the most useful that they've ever had. So the slider you're going to be interested in is, and it's a fairly new slider, is called Dehaze. So what is Dehaze? I just taught my Death Valley class last week. I took about 10 photographers out to Death Valley to various locations. And some of the areas where we have like salt flats in front of us and we have mountainous landscapes in the background, if you look way in the back, what happens as you get further distance, it starts to haze up, right? Anywhere you go where there's a landscape, the background's going to be dominated with haze, right?
It's one of those just environmental things that just is what it is.
Right. That's exactly what we know that. Okay, as human beings, we know that we've been on this planet long enough, but do we understand what's happening back there tonally, value wise? What is the haze doing to the background that is different in the foreground? So what the haze does is that the hot your scene is always made up of shadows, midtones, highlights, right? Even in the background where the mountains are, where the haze are, it's the same rules back there. What happens back there is that those water molecules in the air get really clustered in front of our lens. Therefore, it gets hazy. So what is the haze doing tonally? The highlights in those mountains, these highlights in the mountains back there, are not touched tonally. The haze doesn't touch them. What does the haze touch? It brings up your middle values and it brings up your lower values. The highlights stay the same, but the lower and mid values come up brighter, which flattens it out into a bright haze. Okay, that's basically what it's doing. That's why Adobe called this Dehaze, because it targets this deep, 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 dark areas, and that is it. And it allows you,
And
what was
and
that?
not the midtones.
Not the midtones and not the highlights.
What does it do to the deep shadow area that
Watch
the
me.
black and shadow sliders don't do?
Well, watch me. I go to the dehaze and I pull it to the left. What is it doing? Bringing up those low tones until you get haze.
Rehaze.
No haze. There's dehaze and then there's haze. Either have haze or you don't.
Okay.
Okay. So, but if
Bringing back memories of college hazing now.
that's right, you should see me in the classroom. So if I bring it back to the opposite, we get dehaze. And look at the detail you're producing in there.
So for at least for me, and I'm sure that a lot of us that don't look at the underlying workings of a slider like that, can you summarize? Because we all play with the slider, and there are places that I love it for some things. As a matter of fact, it's a good it's a you'll probably get to this, but it's a good post processing for when you do create an HDR and it comes out flat for the
Right.
reason, and then for the reasons you're talking about, we need to add back in some of those shadows, and dehaze can be really powerful for that. But so it's what is it? It's working only on the lost shadow
It's,
detail. Is
it's,
that
it's, it's working on shadows, right? Don't overcomplicate it. It's just the darker darks of your image. That's what it's focusing on.
I guess
So,
I'm wondering what's the difference between the other things that work on the shadows?
well, look at this here. Look at your histogram. You've got the darkest darks over here and the standard darks here. These are still dark here, but they're brighter than this dark. So it's looking at these darks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, on the histogram. Look, it's basically masking out these darks right there and focusing just on those. The shadow slider, this one at the top, focuses on these darks right in here,
Okay.
right? So now what we're going to do is with Dehaze, it's gonna richen them up. Now this darker line in here, we may not care to see detail in there anyway, artistically, right? Because we want to use that as the richer values to kind of push these other tones forward. So on a creative level, we don't care about the fact that a lot of details in there, but we're going to gain a little stronger detail this way. So I'm pulling it over. Okay. So at this point, I'm looking at the image and we've been playing around with shadows and highlights so far, playing around with the whites. We've been playing around with the highlights and the shadows. But in doing so, we've kind of messed around with the midtones. The midtones have kind of been thrown around in there. The midtones are coming out. We focus on the shadows and the highlights. We got them rich, got them looking good, but the midtones are still coming out more now. So what we need to do is we need to sharpen those up. We need to give the midtones contrast now. So we got this haze of midtone in there, which still makes our image look a little hazy. And the way to eliminate that is to increase the contrast in the midtone, and that is what clarity is for.
Contrast in midtones, you say.
That you put contrast in the midtones. If I pull it to the left, soft, flat. See? If I pull it to the right, look at that. It just snaps. Right? So,
I found clarity, more than a little bit of clarity, starts to make give it a strange, unrealistic look. So you got to be really careful with how much you add there, right?
well, yeah, you do, but right now we're working in values. We want to get a good black and white image.
Right,
We'll
right, right.
deal with the color later.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
So, so see what's happening? Now we're increasing the contrast in the midtone, which is giving it a lot more snap and a lot more detail in here. Now, look at that. It's a lot more detail. That concrete is looking a lot nicer. Now, there's one other little area that's been neglected all this time until recently with Adobe Camera Raw. So since we have contrast adjustments in the midtones with the clarity slider, we never had contrast adjustments for the highlights until now. That's texture. Contrast adjustment in the highlights. So if I pull the texture to the left, soft, look at the highlights. It's only touching the highlights, soft highlights, because we're bringing down the contrast. We're flattening out the contrast in the higher tones of our image. But if we bring it to the right, it almost looks like it's sharpening.
Wonderful. I'm just and it's right there in front of us.
Yeah.
They're in order. Highlights on top, midtones, clarity, dehaze, shadows. And I've never had a good explanation given to me about these sliders, so well done, mate.
Thank
Yeah.
you. My
And
pleasure.
those are those kind
But what
those
happened
sliders tend to be just, hey, use this, hey, use it, and
is
not really explained.
exactly Adobe doesn't teach abstractly,
Hmm.
right? When you, I came from a when I went to my ex girlfriend and I went to Yosemite for one year when I first started school, first started the photography program, and then we decided to go on over to San Francisco because we had never been there before. So we went over to San Francisco, and at the De Young Museum happened to be an Ansel Adams exhibit. She and I both were taking a beginning level photography class, darkroom 101 or something like that. So I sat there in front of these magnificent prints, these big mural sized prints with this luminosity of depth and feeling exuding from it. And at that moment, that was when I decided I wanted to be a photographer. And another thing I couldn't figure out was why was his work so great and mine sucked so bad, right?
Well, I tell
So,
you, getting a chance to view it in that intended way,
right.
that
But
would is something most of us haven't been able to do, to really appreciate him.
understanding those values become critical. So now, after I've done all of this, I might want to go to my highlights, which is the extreme highlights, right? The more of the really intense, bright areas of highlights, and maybe bring them up to give it a little extra depth. See, boom, let it pop a little bit. Okay, let it pop a little bit. I'm going to bring it up a little more. Now this thing is starting to take on more of a three-dimensionality feel. Now, all this is going to relate what we're to our workflow in our HDR program, okay? So by understanding this, it gives you a foundation of how you should be working in Photomatix. All right, so now from here, I'm thinking, okay, the extreme blacks, maybe I can pull them back. I tell you what, instead of doing that, maybe I can just go to, let me pull this down a little bit. Maybe I can just go to clarity and see if I can just pop up a little more clarity. Because I have a tendency to give a little more strength. There we go. There we go. That's it. That's better. Now, here's where it gets real fun. So far, you guys see me pulling together a black and white image, right? I'm not quite sure if you get where I'm going next or what's going to happen next. Remember, we took that saturation down here to 0, guys? Okay. Now, watch what happens as I bring it up. Remember, 0 is right here, dead center, right below the vibrance slider where it too is set to 0. Now, if I take this slider and move it over just a little bit, look at that. Right about there is probably good enough. Look at where the slider is for the saturation.
And it doesn't seem it's counterintuitive because I see a lot of color, but I see minus 43,
Yeah,
and the slider's down at like at a quarter position, you could call it, and it doesn't seem
yeah, exactly.
natural. Yeah. What does it look like if you put it back to 0?
Oh, 0.
I'm yeah, yeah,
Oh,
exactly. The
0.
like the
The other way.
default.
All right, let's go a little bit up to here, up to there, up to there, up to there, up to there. Pretty garish, isn't it?
Yeah, too much. Yep.
Too much,
Hmm.
right? So if you look at the image, it's very different looking than what your camera shot. Now it has depth. It feels like there's dimensionality in that, where we didn't have that before. Before it was a flat color image. Now it's popping out. The turquoise text is jumping forward, right, off of the reddish orangish character behind it.
Right.
It's all it has this push and pull interplay going on with the image now.
Did you impact the colors compared to, let's go back to what the eye saw, what your eye
So
sees?
let's put done, right? Let's pull these two up to the side. Yeah, there we go. All right. Let's pull these two up here. I should be able to do right. So you can see
Yeah.
how flat this one is
Yeah.
and how this is dripping with texture and character.
definitely. And yeah, and it, just in a very basic way, the colors just look better.
Yeah.
You were working without the color, but then when you add the color back in, they just look better.
But that's right. Basically, I've done nothing to the color but desaturate the color.
Right. That's right. That's what I was getting at, is that you weren't working in the color, but the end result when you brought it back
Right.
looks much more like it was the what would be intended.
And why did it work that way? This is the key
That's what
thing.
I'm wondering.
Understanding why did it work. Okay, here's something really important. And this is something I teach in my advanced Photoshop classes. Um, Photoshop does not work in RGB. Photoshop does not work in CMYK. Photoshop works in LAB, lab.
Does it always work in lab when even
Always,
if when
all,
you're because
always.
you set your color
It will trick your
management.
it'll trick your color management to look the way it would look in an RGB or a CMYK if you so choose those modes. But in the engine, of Photoshop, it's working in LAB.
Because
So what
sometimes I switch to LAB for certain purposes, but
sure,
you're
and
saying in the background it's always in that.
in the background it's always working in LAB.
Interesting.
That is why it did what it did. When we took the saturation out to turn it to black and white, he goes, "Oh, no color. Don't look at the color channels. Only look at the black and white channels, the L channel, the lightness
Hmm.
channel.
Right.
Only look there, right?"
Hmm.
So then, when you work it in those black and white channels, then you bring back in the color. Okay, I'm going to bring back in the color. So the color is just an overlay, an extension of what you've done in your value channels, your lightness channel, which enhances the color greatly without saturating the color. So the fact that your slider here, your saturation slider is lower, that means you have more pixel information in your file. The higher the saturation of your color, the closest to 255 of red, green, and blue you're getting, which means closer to 255 means that you're losing detail,
Hmm.
right? You're going to bright white, losing detail. I'm keeping that saturation down and enhancing the values, which means now there's more pixels physically that's going to be in this image to interpret your vision.
How much of the color? Because I was noticing the difference between in the before and after, even at the zero default saturation, and how much of that color is our perception of the color due to the tonal changes you made? Is that even a factor here, do you think?
No, because I'm working as to what I want to create visually. I'm making a decision based on where my heart's telling me to go. I'm not trying to be a scientist about it.
It's pretty scientific.
Well, yeah, but understanding is important, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
definitely.
understanding what the science is doing is one thing. Trying to be a numbers oriented guy is another. That's not the point. The point is, like, for example, you look at your histogram. I get a lot of questions on histograms, like, what should a histogram look like? Shouldn't it have like a smooth curve? Well, you're being scientific about it, because if you take a picture of a white graffiti, of black and white graffiti on the wall, that histogram is going to look nothing like the way you're taught it's supposed to look. It's about what you're trying to produce artistically. So what we're going to do next is we're going to take this thought process into Photomatix. Okay, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to do it this way, because I'm going to click done, and let me go to Bridge here. All right, and in Bridge I created a document. And let's see, I want to make sure I got this right. Say 2 stops over, 2 stops under. All right, so let me just open them all up here for you. 2 stops under, and I should have a normal right there. Okay, open them up. These are 16-bit images. So if I go to mode, image menu mode, and I come right over to here, it says I'm in RGB color. and I'm in 16-bit channel. I did one for a normal shot of a gradient. Now, I created this as a 32-bit gradient. That is what HDR is,
Right.
right? A RGB is an 8-bit mostly, right? So that's 2 to the power of 8. So 8, 2 multiplied by itself 8 times is going to be your 256 shades of gray, right?
Right.
2 to the power of 16, which is 16-bit, is going to give you what, approximately 64,000 shades of gray. Well, 2 to the power of 32, that's your HDR. So that means your colors are going way off the scale. Your values are going way off to the scale than what your printer can produce, or more than likely what your printers can produce. Your monitors can pretty much see it, but your printers are not going to produce it.
Well, very few monitors can see it at this
That
point,
right. Very
and
very.
no paper can print it.
I'm using 2 BenQ monitors, and then the Wacom Cintiq 22. So the Wacom Cintiq 22 has a less is not is it doesn't have a large as large of a range as my BenQ monitors.
Right.
But I try to calibrate them as close as possible, and that's for a whole other story. But here, what I've done is I've created, and I'll just show you this real quick in Bridge, a document. I think it's this one. Okay, this is a 32-bit file document, right? Let me go ahead and just pull this on over. Oops, get out of that.
That's a
So
32-bit TIFF, and
yeah,
you can make 32-bit.
this is a 32-bit TIFF, which I produce from this 16-bit files, the 2 stops over, 2 stops under, and normal. And I'm going to go back into Photoshop to share that with you real quick. Okay, so these are now 16. That was a 32-bit file that I reduced down to 16 bits. You can see I'm in my 16-bit channel. This one being my normal, this one being 2 stops under, and this one being 2 stops over. It's the same gradient. So I increased the intensity of the file and then reduce it to 16-bit. So what I've done is I'm getting something close to what your camera produces. Your camera will produce something close to a 16-bit file. It'll never produce a 32-bit file. If it did, we wouldn't need Photomatix or any other HDR program to produce what we want. So our cameras go to close to a 16-bit. So this is my
Most of those raw files are 12, have an option of 12 or 14-bit for what that's worth.
and that's true, but technically they're 12 to 14-bit. I think the highest we can get is 14-bit with most cameras, even the full frame. So normal, 2 stops over, and 2 stops under. We do this because we want to ensure that we get details in our shadows. In order to ensure we get details in our shadows without all the noise that can be introduced, because noise in the shadows are always introduced. It's the nature of the beast. And what do I mean by the nature of the beast? What actually produces the noise in your shadows? It's the heating up of your sensor on your camera. The longer you expose your image onto that sensor, the hotter it gets. So when you're in a darkened room and your ISO is at ISO 100 and you need to open up that shutter for like several seconds to expose that room, your sensor heats up more. Therefore, it introduces electronic noise,
Interesting.
right? So
Yeah, we know that. I think the important thing is that to take away is that noise is much more in the shadows.
that's right. So if we open up the lens, which means less exposure time, we're not no, the lens, we're expanding the shutter. Actually, that's going to be more exposure time, expanding the shutter. But your brightest image out of your bracketed images will help ensure that you'll get some, acceptable detail in the shadows. If we want to solve this problem of noise, which I hope one day they do, you have to like, use liquid nitrogen to freeze your sensor so that when you expose it at ISO, say ISO 64,000, you can get your image looking just like ISO 100 if you keep that sensor cool. But we haven't figured that out yet. So we're all working at higher ISOs. It's going to give you more noise. That's just the way it's going to be.
Right.
Until they figure that out. So what I did here is we're going to take these images into Photomatix. And I'm going to show you what Photomatix is doing. So to me, as an artist, to master your art, you've got to know your tools. You got to understand what they do. A master painter can produce magnificent masterpieces because he understands those brushes and his paints and this turpentine, and mixes it in such a way that he understands what he's going to produce and why he's going to produce it. There's no mystery. He understands his science, and he understands how to use that science to produce what he wants to express on that canvas to connect with his viewers, right? We could be no different. So understand that the darker values, this -2, is there to ensure that we're gaining details in the highlights. You look at the highlights have come way down because that's going to ensure I'm not going to lose any information in the highlights. If I go to the overexposure, this is going to ensure that I'm going to gain a lot more detail in these lower tones. If you take a look at the normal, right? Look at the numbers here. 0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3. This is floating point technology. For those who are 3D artists, we get this because we've been using this forever, right? But the Photoshop people, fairly well within the history of Photoshop, say midway, they introduced this floating point system where it's 0 to 1, 0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5. 0.5 is your medium gray. Your medium gray that we rely on to produce the perfect exposure through your sensor in your camera, right? Then all the way up to 1, which is almost like Ansel Adams' zone system.
Very much.
Same thing, right?
A lot of similarities with the way we think about shooting and processing HDR with the zone system. I agree, yeah.
Okay, so I got the Photomatix guys here, so I'm on the right track here.
That's really one of those. Frankly, you're more technical than I am. I'm a photographer. I'm not an engineer or whatever, and so a lot of the technical things I just know by being told. Kind of this is the best way to go. But that one I came up with on my own, just realizing how similar that zone system is to what I do with Photomatix. So, yeah, that was, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So I don't really consider myself a technician or being technical. I just need to, I always, if I'm going to understand something, I really need to understand it. If I understand it, then I can I can be creative with it. I can go beyond the technology and think abstractly, right? Think abstractly. That kicks in your creative processes. So, all right, here's my 3 images. So you've seen them already. Now let's go on the bridge. There are my 3. I'm going to put them right next to each other so I can grab them easier. So normal, there we go. So there we go. Put them right next. So 2 stops, that's over. I'm going to put the 2 stops under on this side and 2 stops over on that side. There we go. So 2 stops under, normal, 2 stops over. Okay. All 16-bit files, true 16-bit images. So what we're going to do is we're going to produce a 32-bit image. Let's go over to Photomatix and go grab it real quick. There she is. All right, there's our Photomatix interface. Now, view Photomatix as a program, a much more sophisticated program to smudge your charcoal or your lead around on your canvas, right? It's taking those tones and just smudging it around and making areas bright and areas darker. It may not necessarily be according to your will, but it's going to produce something that you can work with when we bring it back into Photoshop. Thus, this Photomatix Photoshop integration concept. So let's go to Bridge, and you can do this right from Bridge. Didn't Photomatix used to have like a plugin for Bridge or something?
Not for Bridge, for Lightroom.
For Lightroom, huh?
Yeah, you
Huh.
can take your bracketed shots directly from Lightroom.
Okay. All right.
For Bridge, you kind of don't need one. Well, actually, especially since you have TIFFs,
Mhm.
you can just drag them right in.
Oh yeah.
Because
Which is what.
I'll typically, depending on the kind of work, a lot of times I'll run the it's under Tools image processor, and I'll convert the raws, and then I just take my TIFFs and just drag them over into Photoshop. Excuse me, just drag them over into the Photomatix icon.
Okay. All right. So here they are. I'm gonna target all three of them. Two steps under, normal, over, and I'm gonna just drag and drop it right into Photomatix. And what would you like to do with those drag files? Merge to HDR processing or open the files only? Nope. Put them in the processing, and let's get going. Okay, it sees them, right? For some reason, it's telling me this one's -3, but I set up to be -2. I'm not quite sure, but you can see my three images, right?
Actually, yeah, that's because it isn't detecting, like when you created those files, they're not really
Data,
they're not images out of a camera, so I'm just
right?
guessing that it
It's
doesn't
not
have the
data, so it's not guess,
exposure.
but it doesn't matter. I don't care.
Yeah.
It's close enough, right? It's close enough.
And you can tell it below there. You can just say that you did it at 2 stops apart. See a little pop up below.
What, here or
Yeah,
here?
right, right. Yeah, there you go. You can just change that to 2.
All right, I'll do that now. Go to or
Oh, I wanted to say one thing just so people don't get the wrong idea. When I was saying that you can just drag the images from Bridge, that's true. But that's usually due to the way Lightroom works, Mac Photos, if anybody still uses Aperture, the way a lot of these applications work, it doesn't, for some reason, when you drag and drop them from like a Lightroom window into Photomatix,
right,
it doesn't get the right, it's not what the things are expecting. Sometimes it'll just open up like the preview images in Photomatix, which is not what you want because you're working with a small version, a small JPEG instead. So that's why I said that. For Bridge, just drag and drop. For Lightroom, then the plugin is much better.
okay. All right, so it sees my three images. I'm two stops apart from each one, so it's now showing it accurately. Now I'm going to merge. Next, choose merge options. I'm going to click that next. This is a Photoshop file that I created, so I don't need to align the images in the event that you take your images with your hand and your body's moving and you want to make sure everything's aligned accurately. That's what you would check there. Um, if you have something moving in your image, that's where you show the options for ghosting. So you can tell Photomatix to exclude a certain image or several images so that it's only going to include that one shot of the bird flying over and not multiple shots of the bird flying over because it's moving within your scene. Reduce noise. I don't need to worry about that for this example. I'll show you another example and we'll go through these real quick. Um, I'm not going to worry about anything else. I think everything else is fine at this point. So I'm going to click merge to HDR. Sit back and relax. And of course, it opens it up on my second screen. So I got to drag it on over. So I'm going to actually reduce this down. Scroll it. Okay. Okay. Now, here's where everybody gets confused. And rightfully so. Um, you get your image and you get all these little sliders over here. So what we're going to do, and the way that I learned this was just take the sliders down to 0. Take them all down to 0. So actually this one needs to go to 0. That's about, I can probably just tap on that right there and say 0. Okay. Did that work? Tap there and hit 0. There. Okay. This is -10. Let's zero that out. Okay. Let's go here to tone compression, zero it out. If I can click, come on. Let me just click on it. There we go. Zero.
Looks like you're clicking away too quick or something.
Yeah, no, I'm just being impatient. Let's go over to the strength. Okay. And we're going to go to zero. Okay. Interesting. Let's go down here at the bottom. So smooth highlights, zero. Okay. Everything looks like it's zero, I believe. I don't think I'm missing anything. Okay. Everything's zero. It's kind of looking like my normal image. So let's understand what this does. Remember, we've got 3 photographs. I'm avoiding these over here to the right. These are just presets. If you want to understand your program so you can be more artistic with it, then avoid the presets. So I'm going in natively. I want everything back to zero. I'm looking at my image. In fact, actually, let's pull this on over so we can see the rest of that gradient graph. And I'll pull this on over a little more. There we go. Okay. 0 to 1. Okay. From 0 all the way to 1. Floating point system. All right. Now, we had what? Midtones, shadows, and highlights, right? 2 stops over, normal, 2 stops under. This strength right up here, that first slider at the very top, does one thing and one thing only. It introduces more of the darker images, the -2 images, into your scene. So looking at your -2 and your normal and just starting to introduce some of that tone throughout your scene. So right now, it looks really bright. That's because if I go to the slider and slide it over, see, it's starting to introduce more of those darker aspects of the image into your scene. So if I go back to close to zero, see, you see it goes real bright because it's utilizing more of the mid-tones and the brighter values. Some of the darker tones too, but it's favoring more of giving you more brighter values. And if you bring the strength to the right, it's going to start introducing the lower values into your scene, more of your shadows into your scene. All right. Yeah,
If you bring up the histogram while you do that, that can kind of show.
that's a good point. How do I get to that here? I said under the
Under view, yeah, view 8-bit histogram. So it's giving you an idea of what the 8-bit will look like.
all right. So view.
View on Photomatix. I think you're on.
Oh, I'm in
You're
Photoshop.
in Bridge or whatever.
I'm in Photoshop. It was in the background there, so let's go over to. There she is. Okay. So here, where's my menu?
Just click on the. Oh, you've got a small. It looks like the regular application window is smaller than the one you've got there, so it's probably behind it.
That's interesting. Let's see. Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. No, that's not it. Oh, come on. Where is this thing?
Oh! No, you've got you got the whole application.
Oh, there it
The
is.
preview is yeah.
I see.
That preview image is
Confusing.
just barely. Yeah, here you
That's
go.
confusing. All right, I'll bring it down. I was being fancy here.
It was just taking up. It was going right up to the edge there.
Yeah.
It's okay.
So,
Usually you don't need those
all right, let's do
menus.
100%. Maybe I can bring these down. There we go. That might be with a. Oh no, that's actually reducing it. Okay, there we go. Make it easier for everybody to see. Okay, there we go. All right. So view menu 8-bit is there.
Probably
So
probably on your other screen.
this is crazy. Oh, there it is. It is on the other screen.
Mister, I've got four screens
Got,
going at the same
got three
time.
screens at one time. Things pop up. It's really funny.
Yeah.
Okay, so there we go. Right. Brighter, introducing the darker. She's moving closer to the dark side. Now the light side to the dark side. Light side to the dark side. It was seduced by the dark side. All right, tone compression. Um, let's pull this to the left. Look at what it's doing. It's compressing, it's taking the lower tones and smudging them out over all the light tones. And then if we go the other way, it's taking the light tones and smudging them out over on top of the midtones and the darker tones. So it's like putting a Gaussian blur filter on it, but favoring the highlights or favoring the shadows. Okay. I'm gonna double click on it and go to 0. Details contrast. Okay. This is just adding contrast. Um, Smooth highlights is interesting. Watch what happens. See, it's only focusing on the highlights only. It takes the highlights and smooths them out, smudge them out, smudge them out, smudge them out.
That's there largely to maintain the whites. Like
Right,
when you start doing things like compressing tones, then
right,
those bright whites can start to get gray because you're compressing the tones. You're making them more the same, right? So
right. But look at how it's compressing the highlights. The highlights are getting brighter, they're smudging out, but they're stopping right around the midtones, the darker areas.
yeah,
All right. So that's smooth highlights. Let's go to, let me double click this. That's 0. Good. Go to white point. That's pretty self explanatory. It's finding the strongest whites in your image and targeting only the whites. Bring up the white point to a brighter value.
you can kind of control where if and where it'll start clipping.
Right. So the white point is designed to clip your whites. The black point clips your blacks. Right. Micro smoothing is like finite smoothing of everything. Right. So it's like you're taking everything and you're smoothing it into one another, and it gives you these various different results. And then when you're done, actually, there's more down here too. But when you're done, you don't like your color, you can make it more saturated or less saturated. In other words, saturated in the highlights, saturation in the highlights, shadow smoothness, shadow clipping. You can play with those as well. So in
So
essence,
a daily show with Stephen Burns, you go through a different method each time. Up on top there, you can switch from details enhancer to the next one and go through the.
that's right. So here, I avoid these here. These are like presets, really.
No, those are entirely different processing engines. That's like switching to lab color. No, it's not. It's not really related to that at all. But it's
I was going to
it's
call you on that one.
no. But I'm saying it's if you're uh, well in that if that's going to be an analogy, it's that you can switch there for different purposes.
Right.
They all have their pros and cons, you know. Like
And you
the
notice that you're not getting the same sliders under each one.
right
They
because
change. Like this one's a little different. So they're presets, but they're presetting it, limiting you to the sliders that you see for each of the presets there. Um, average, average has no sliders. It's just doing it all for you.
yeah, it's
Uh,
literally averaging.
right. And
But
then here,
those the other options like contrast tone balancer, contrast optimizer, those are just entirely different ways of tone mapping, and they use different. It's like a
right,
different tool. It's almost like a different application. and they all have the pros and cons. Like a lot of us doing realistic stuff, we use Fusion, and
Right.
so
And
they're yeah.
this fusion only allows you two images, so that's kind of interesting.
No, no,
But
no. There's Fusion and natural Fusion interior. There's how many are we up to now?
you
One,
got,
two,
well,
three,
I'm all the way
four.
down to the bottom. Fusion two images, average fusion. Well, I already checked these out. I think, yeah, there you go. There's more fusions. With this other one gets you only two sides, strength and radius. I
Mhm.
find if you want total control of everything, of all the sliders that Photomatix has in its repertoire of, or in its arsenal of tonal correction, I would go to the details enhancer, the very top one, and then all your sliders come back. They all come back right there, and it gives you complete control.
Well,
And
let
the
me just for I'm the first one to tell someone you do what you got to do what works, and that there's no wrong way to do anything. But the thing that uh, the thing you said wrong is that the details. It's not that details enhancer has all of the sliders,
okay,
and the other ones have less of them. They're
okay,
entirely different. So when you switch from details enhancer to contrast optimizer, okay, yes, it still has strength. Some of them might be named similarly or the same, but it's a different tool. It's not that it has less of the sliders that are in details enhancer. It's just a different tone mapper.
okay.
So
All right.
so
Well, I
it's not more and less. It's just different. So that's the area I wanted to correct.
okay.
But the thing about details enhancer is it's also the kind of the original, the most developed, the most powerful, and the easiest to get fake looking results, but also the most powerful in terms of maintaining the huge range. So I think for Stephen, for your purposes as the artist, it probably is the one you want to use the most. I just wanted to make sure that it's a distinction, and it's a common question that is not that easy to get our head around at
I
first
guess
because
when I teach people, I'm teaching them to understand the entirety of the tools.
then we need to talk
So,
about the other tools.
well, yeah, we don't have time to do that. We come
No,
back for
not today. Not today. That's not what I meant. I meant you and me, you and I. Sometime we can pop on and do little shorter versions, but
another.
uh, and this is really good for me too because just understanding people's understandings is important. And as a guy that I use Photomatix all the time for my own work, and I don't really use details enhancer that much because I'm really doing just interiors and stuff that are supposed to look very realistic and and also the kind of work that I don't spend too much time on one image. You're really doing things like batches and doing quick edits, so it's a lot different kind of work. So we're good yin yang here, and so so yeah, just keep in mind that that they're just very different tools rather than that one has all of the options.
Okay. All right. So how about if we actually go pick an image?
Yes, please.
All right. So I'm gonna close this one
I'll,
out. I
I'll
don't need
give
it anymore. Just a little
give you
education.
back the full screen there. Here you go.
Oh,
But this is and also I'm sitting here. I'm not. Hopefully, it doesn't sound like I'm picking on you.
no, no, not at
Because
all. Not the least.
an exercise like this about going through with just the black and white and going through and seeing how those things impact. I'm going to do this for all those other methods later,
Okay.
and maybe I'll live stream it. I don't know, but I'm going to do that because it's a really great way to open up that way of looking at it. So thanks. I'll give you the screen back. Go ahead.
Get on and join you and says, Ron, don't touch that dial.
Yeah.
All right. Let's grab something interesting or somewhat interesting. Okay, we're gonna do something that'll be short and simple. So let's go and let's do this one. Okay. Um, this is a night shot during my Death Valley class. There is the Armagosa Hotel, has some very interesting rustic architecture. And let me, the first thing I'm going to do is hit Command R because I want to bring this into Adobe Camera Raw. And this is a processing I think even Ron's going to recommend everybody to use, and that you use some of the tools that are superior in Photoshop, um, to enhance your image, and then you have to spit it out as a formatted image. In other words, a TIFF. Currently, what I've just brought in was a raw file, so a Canon raw file. But I'm going to want to spit this out as a formatted TIFF so that all those subtle adjustments that I applied to it is going to be available for Photomatix to take advantage of. So here is my darker version, normal version, and brighter version, right? Um, and I took this specifically for an HDR test. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to the optics, and I'm going to tell it to remove chromatic aberration, which all your images should have those on by default. I mean, just religiously, just have them on by default. Then at the top, we're not going to do any type of tonal adjustments. So if you want Photomatix to read the full range of information that your sensor produced, don't let Photoshop screw it up and manipulate and mess with those tones. Leave the tones alone. The optics are good. They're good. And some people will apply a little bit of sharpening or a little bit of um, noise reduction in Photoshop. That's about all you want to do. That's it.
Not even sharpening to be.
Sharpening. Okay,
Yeah.
you heard Ron. He said no sharpening.
Yeah,
None.
to be official, noise reduction is the raw conversion. That's the best time to apply noise reduction. That could be in camera if you quote unquote shoot JPEG, which is not the worst thing necessarily, but I mean there's pros and cons. But if you do quote unquote shoot JPEG, that means it's converting the raw to JPEG right there in the camera, and it's applying raw noise reduction among other things. But what it also does is it applies some of those exposure, contrast, etc., which Stephen, you very correctly set all those to 0, because Photomatix is going to create a 32-bit file first, and it's better off having that linear image, so unedited. So yeah, some noise reduction is good. The other things you mentioned, excellent idea. No sharpening.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? I want to do one more image after this. So I thought it would be important to do, but I just have to think about it. But right now, we're going to go ahead and we're going to export this out. So it's all done. Hit the export button, top right-hand corner, a little down arrow inside a little box. And then I'm going to go export this out. So where am I going to export that out? Let's go select the folder here. There is HDR with Ron. No, let's not do that one. Let's do go to my other drive where I'm going to have my presentation files in, and there's my Photomatix. I will put in here Photoshop processed. Dump it in there so I know where things are. That's going to select that folder, and we're going to make sure that this is going to be a TIFF file. I'm going to name it HDR underscore, right? And beginning number is going to be 1. Okay, I think that'll work just fine. I'm going to save that one out. Okay, so next I'm going to do one more image, which is the one that we started working with originally. So I'm going to go grab this one here. Now this one's got more. This one's got about 7 exposures. So I'm going to grab. Actually, no, this is not. No, it doesn't. This is not 7 exposures. This is actually.
I was going to say, why so many?
It's a bracketed image. It was supposed to be for a panoramic. So I did 3 sets of bracketed images here because I'm going to do an HDR and then spit it out as a TIFF, 16-bit TIFF, and then I'm going to do the same for the other 2 sets of bracketed images and then merge them together in the photo merge. So that was what that was for. Threw myself off there a little bit. So I'm going to just select those, Command R. Okay, there we go. Just go to my lens right down here, my optics, chromatic aberration, profile. Okay, I think that's good. I'm going to export that out. And then this should see the last number that I left off with. No, I didn't. Okay, so HDR number 2, beginning number. So the other one was 3, right? So we'll start this one at 5, just to be safe. There we go. Done. Okay. Let's go to the bridge real quick. Let's go get them. Photoshop processed. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, my fault. I wasn't paying
Did have
attention.
three selected, right?
Yeah, I didn't select them all. Darn it. That's my fault. All right. So let's go back, and I hate it when I do that. All right. We're going to go back to Photomatix. We'll grab these files. I'm just going to do it over again. Command R. Bring that back into here. Select them all like that. All right. Now, once they're all selected, optics. Okay. We'll go with that one. Let's export it out. Same folder is fine. I'll give this a different name. So HDR2, so I don't confuse myself. Start with number 1. Okay. Save it. And done. And I'll do one more. Okay, we'll go get those 3. So 1, 2, and 3. Command R. Select all 3. Okay. And I've got, open that up for export. Oh, I didn't do something, did I? Did I do the optics on that one? I did. Okay, I did. Right. Okay, there we go. Select them all. Make sure they're all selected. There we go. And we'll go number 2, and and this will be number 4. Good. So that does it automatically. And we're going to click target save. Done. All right. Go back to done. Go back to Photoshop process. There they are. Okay. 1, 2, 3. And 1, 2, 3. All right. We'll start with this one first. Drop it in, merge it. Okay. And merge. I'm going to align them just in case this was handheld. I know it wasn't, but just in case there's any movement, I'm going to go ahead and align all the source images. I know this is on a tripod, so I'm not going to worry about removing ghosts. Reduce noise. You can if you want. To save time, I'm not going to click it on. I've already did the chromatic aberrations, and everything else I'm going to leave the same. So I'll go ahead and align it. All right, so there's my histogram popped up in front of me. Now this popped up over to the third monitor.
Even those monitors.
Yeah, no. The Photomatix does that. I mean, I have a problem with Bridge acting up with 3 monitors because the other 2 monitors are HDMI connectors, and this monitor is not. It's a newer connector.
That's interesting. I'm always going with external monitors and then laptop and back and forth, and so I feel I know what you mean. It never
All right.
remembers where to leave the window.
Here's something I didn't cover before was this lighting effects mode here. They basically gives you, I guess, the presets is what it looks like.
No, those are much like that other thing we were talking about.
Yeah.
What you're looking at there is kind of the original or legacy or whatever way
Yep.
of doing that. If you uncheck the box,
Hmm.
then that slider, and I know people think this, but it's not presets of the slider for the buttons. They actually work in a different way. This is the newer updated way. Yeah, it'll move where the light is. I always have a hard time describing them because I have, have a way of thinking them in my head. But if you want realism, you can usually go to the right. Uh, yeah, it's one of those that I have a hard time explaining out loud because in my head it does certain things. But
Right.
I do recommend to keep it on the slider. It just does it does a more realistic job of blending the light.
So we've got a color image inside Photomatix. Remember I said color is the devil? Well, it's still the devil, even in color in Photomatix. So what I like to do is come right down here to saturation, just like we did in ACR, and completely pull it out. Is it pulling out my color saturation? Let's see what's going on here. There it is. It was just taking a little time. When I click on it, it brings it back. Got it. So there is my desaturated image, black and white image, and we can see where the depth really lies. So my slider, let's go up to here. My strength, pull this out, pull the strength on over, and you can determine how much of this strength you want to introduce. Where it's taking the lower values and bringing them in. Let's see what tone compression does. Okay, that's looking a little better. I'll pull it back the other way. That's smudging more of the lower values in. I'm gonna bring it up brighter. I think I'm gonna want this just a little bit brighter. Let me see what lighting adjustments does. It's not doing much because we don't have a whole lot of color here. Smooth highlights. That's very subtle. It's doing something
That's probably just going to mostly impact the lights along the ceiling, I imagine.
right, right up in here. We have this nice little starburst type of effect up there as
Yeah,
well.
they'll probably stay lighter and brighter, or whiter and brighter with some smooth highlights on there, I'd imagine.
Right, smooth highlights. See that there? So I'm gonna keep that up a little bit more. White point, you probably don't want to mess with that. Look what the white point does. It really blows it out. Black point, and I'm gonna go to micro smoothing. So smoothing everything out, but to minute amounts. Um, and again, actually, if we come over here, oh, there's the black point there. Let me see what happens if that's bringing it down, bring it up. I think we had a slider that represents more of exposure. I thought there was, but maybe
Or
not.
just, well, there's brightness below there in the color settings section. There's brightness.
Setting? Okay,
Is that
there it
one?
is. That's it. Thought it was up here somewhere at first, but okay. So once we're done, we bring in our saturation. See that? It's different, isn't it? Look at what the saturation is. It's -3.
And that looks very. And I was looking forward when see what you did with this one because it has that kind of classic night, very warm look to this, and so
Yes.
I was curious to how your workflow would work with this one. It's really interesting because the saturation is even low now, and to
Mm-hmm.
me, it's still probably oversaturated at this
Right.
point.
I agree.
And that has some reds in it, which that how reds can oversaturate very easily in any
Right.
kind of photo editing, and you could actually bring down the saturation in just the red might be
Hmm.
helpful too. Or you might not need to because your saturation stays a bit lower than the default anyway, but just a few options there.
Yeah. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna save this one or commit this one. I'm looking for my. Why am I not seeing it? I'm just tired. Let's
Sorry, I
see.
missed what you said. What are you looking for?
Yeah, I wanna commit my changes here. So
Oh, down, commit the changes.
there
Yeah,
it
down there, then the finish. Yeah,
is.
next finish.
Right, looking for it. There we go. Okay, so you're getting a nice little histogram, which is kind of nice. So you can.
Yeah, that little that window you're pointing at now, the finishing touch it's called, that's really there for those who want to do some post processing right there in Photomatix. It's
Right.
probably not made for Stephen Burns because he's going to expertly post process in Photoshop.
Photoshop.
Yeah, so that's really intended for people that are going to do a quick post process and then save it and deliver it. Where
Right.
that's probably not you, but it's there if you want that.
All right. So now what I'll do is I'll click that one done. Now let's actually I can save this out. Now in your save options, let's go to save image as. Um, let's see, so right down here. Let's see if this is it. You get your TIFF, your JPEG 8 and 16-bit, but you can also save it as something else. I thought it was under the save as. It's the .exr
Well, you
file.
you can you can save it as you can do that if you
What's the
you can do
image?
it prior to. So you've already tone mapped it, so it's not any
Oh,
longer. It's no
oh,
longer a
so it's
32-bit
no longer.
file.
So I have to do it before I
Yeah,
actually
yeah. You,
commit.
you could still do that. You could still do it by going back, but there's not much need because you wouldn't get any of the editing, any of the changes you made in Photomatix. You would just have an untone mapped. I almost said raw, but that's not the right word because raw is something else. It's an unprocessed 32-bit HDR file
Right.
full of luminance information and data, but not a photo.
Well, let's get something else. I'm gonna close this one out, and let's go grab that last one because it has a little bit more color in it, and it's one we worked with earlier. Let's go ahead and oh, there it is. There. Oh, these are the wrong ones. Let's see. This is the TIFF, and that one and that one. Okay. Oops, no, not that one. Am I missing one? I think I'm
You
missing one.
no, you did one and then you did three. So I think you just need the four, five. You need the last three. I think
Well,
on the right side. I think.
I've got a dark and light. No, I see. No, this is the one I processed. I'm going to run. I'm going to
Hmm.
process. That's why I'm confusing myself. Photomatix.
One reason I love watching videos like this and doing videos like this is we see that everybody has the same
Oh
kind
yeah.
of little frustrations and going back and million photos to sort through and
Oh yeah. So
and while
the
while you're doing that,
course.
can I just say now that I fully intend, I'll give credit where it's due, but I fully intend to recommend and maybe talk about and who knows, maybe write something about. I'm thinking the name could be editing your color photos in black and white, something along that line, to get people to
I would
wonder what
say
it's about.
maybe the titling this probably um, award-winning color through black and white workflow.
Well, that would be yours if
Oh,
because
you're
you're the expert at it.
talking about me.
Well, I'll bring you up and give you and give you shout outs or whatever. But and hey, Steven, it's not like that many people listen to me, but maybe we'll do some articles on the website or something like that.
Oh, that'd be great.
But I love the idea of doing part of the workflow in a black and white mode. It's just
Mhm.
brilliant. I don't know why I didn't think of that. So thanks.
Well, I was raised in the black and white world. I mean, like when I got my certificate in photography, that was what I was. That was all we did
Yeah,
was
yeah,
white.
yeah.
Um,
We can do an old guy segment and say that that's what most of us in school photography, any kind of classes in school that I did was all in black and white, but it was in the dark room. So we're not going to do a color dark room for high school and college people that are not a major. So yeah, black and white is really the foundation, and it's really good to be reminded of that. And for those that are younger, to be have that pointed out. So it's really
there
good.
we go. Got them all. Okay, those are the three that I want. That was
Okay,
our original, what was the other half of the original image. So I'm gonna go ahead and drag it on over. Okay,
give you a little cover while you're doing it.
that's right. There we go. That's it. All right. Choose. I'll keep the alignment on. Don't need to remove ghosts. I'm not going to worry about reducing noise just to save on time. Um, yeah, we'll do reduce chromatic aberration.
You did that when you were converting the raw.
That's
So
already
there's
okay, very good.
in fact I even saw you doing it. So there's no reason. Saves
Oh,
time, and doing the same process over probably only
yes,
has negative results, right?
that's right. You pray for, did I do it or did I not do it? What did I do?
There are presets for that, Stephen. Presets.
Uh, there's an app for that, huh?
Well, for as far as importing photos from a camera and applying like a raw, like a applying those kind of basic settings, I'm for that kind of preset. I'm
All
not
right.
really a preset guy, but in that kind of use, I do
Oh, that's
I
just
do
being
like it.
efficient.
Yeah.
So I'm going to come down. I'm going to take off that saturation completely. We're going to work in just like we did in Adobe Camera Raw. Bring it up a little bit, zoom in a little bit so we can see this. Okay, so we've got our strength here. I think I'm going to.
So at the risk of being a little bit salesman-like, which it's not my style at all, it seems like what we were going through on Photoshop is kind of automatically done with just default settings. When you load the three in, it kind of already recovers those things, and it's ready to be worked with from there. Like it's already recovered the details from the highlight, mid-tone, and shadow, and then now
Right.
it's ready for your deliberate
Yeah,
settings.
I'm just playing with it just to see what it does. Let's see the white point. If we bring that, see there, that's nicer. Pull that down. So we still have detail. It didn't wash out the whites. I may not want it exactly that high, so I'll bring it down just a little bit here. Let's see, smooth highlights. Kind of play with this a little bit. There you can see how highlights are smoothing out over here in the top right hand corner. If I bring it up, see that? Bringing it down so I can maintain that detail over there. White point. Okay, black point. There we go. That's introducing that nice richer tone in there. That's giving us a nice detail. And again, I'm just trying to get as close as I can to producing some wonderful detail by viewing the values. The values is the thing that's going to tell you just how good your depth is going to be, just how much detail you actually have there. There is, I think it was called micro smoothing. See if I pull it down. There we go. Look at that. Smooth it. Just my finite smoothing techniques there. Not bad. I might want to bring. Let me go up here and go to my uh, smooth highlights. Let's see what that does. There we go. Yeah, yeah, that's better. That's acceptable. Now I'll go to my saturation. Pull it to there. Pull it to there. Yeah. Well, yeah, right about there, it's starting to look pretty darn good. And look how far away. This is a -4. Right? Even if I go up a little bit, say I go up a little bit. I mean, that's good enough. That means something nice to work from. The rest has got to be done in Photoshop, and that's
And
from
what kind of actually I like this. I'm really big on wanting to post process things after Photomatix. What would you like? I think we probably need to wrap up pretty soon. But what do you recommend to do in Photoshop? Go ahead and
well, let's go ahead and click done on that one. I'm gonna leave this alone too. I'm gonna just click
yeah.
done there.
And you can save that and automatically open it in Photoshop in the saving dialog, right?
I don't know what I would do with this one. This is something. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's bring it on in and see what happens.
Go file save
File save as.
and then at the bottom when you save it, you can hit
Right.
that open saved image with at the bottom.
Okay.
Hit Photoshop and
I
or
got
I guess you got to add it the first time,
it.
yeah. And then
Adobe. Adobe Photoshop should be right in there. There it is. It's 2021. Okay. And click open.
think you went off it. Think you got off.
Photoshop 2021. Okay, there it is. Photoshop XC.
That should be there next time, so you can do that each time if you want.
Okay, so if I save this,
That should pop up
there
in
it is.
Photoshop.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's nice. I like that. Pops up.
save a little bit of running around.
Good question. What would I do with this? I would continue. I might continue to work this as a value by coming over. I'm going to duplicate this layer.
We have a different section. I see this is a different section of your panorama than we worked with before, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Cool. So you're making like a higher resolution by getting a few.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's why usually if I find a shot that I like, I'll get a stronger telephoto lens, zoom into a portion of it, and do several shots, and then stitch it all together.
Do you hand hold it for that?
Yeah, you can handhold it for that easily.
Interesting. I've been stitching things for many years,
Right.
and if you want to be careful to get like in that case, either shooting from a shooting from an exact no parallax point or moving evenly across the wall.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's a different talk.
Yeah. So I'm going to right click on this one, make it a smart object to make it non-destructive. And then we're done. Image, adjustment, black and white. And this allows me to shift my values. See? Starts to allow me to shift my values around. So it's looking at the value equivalent associated with the color that I clicked on. All right. So if I turn this off, I clicked on the orange. If I come to the blacks, let's see if I see how that's going richer with the blacks. This may be as far as I might want to go, but let's try this. I'm gonna click OK.
It makes a pretty great black and white image.
Oh yeah, it makes a very interesting black and white image. Um, I'm thinking where I want to go from here is this. I know exactly where I want to go. Create a curves. And what we're going to do is we're going to flatten out the background behind the character because it's competing with my character. So accessing my curves we've created to black and white. We're able to get the detail and the depth from the black and white, but now we need to isolate our primary point of focus, which is this character. Currently, this background competes with the character because there's all this beautiful texture in that wall, which is competing with the graffiti character. So if I take this highlight and pull it down, see how it's flattening out that background? That's what I'm looking for. Now I'm going to target the mask, hit the B key for the brush, right? And I'm going to resize my brush and paint with black. Let's see, is that working there? Let's see, that is, I'm in the wrong tool. B key for the brush. There it is. And start to pull this out. I'm being really sloppy here. X to introduce some of this back in. All right, so I'm just going to, remember, I want the viewer's eye to go toward the subject, which is the graffiti character. Currently, that background is killing that goal. I'm just going to just pull it out. Now I would do a better job on it if I really wanted to keep this as my portfolio piece, but I don't. So I'm just going to work kind of quick and sloppy. Okay. Go. I'm constantly hitting the X key to flip back and forth between white and black. And even though it's not completely finished, you guys are getting the point. Is that I can use values to pull this out, right? Just pulling it out some more. Hit the X key to go to switch back to white, to bring back some of the darker areas where I had accidentally pulled them out. Getting in closer. That's good. I think I'm going to pull out some more details here. All right, so with that done, I'm going to place both of those into its own layer group, Command G. Okay, so here, I assume Ron is still there.
I'm here. I realized I was muted for a while.
So we'll make sure you're still there. So Command J. Now what I'm doing is I'm going to show you what this looked like, the original values. So Command Shift U. There we go. All right. The reason we have this color image, let me go ahead and pull this closer. The reason we have this color image is because of these values. So these values here is why the image looks like this. I don't want these values. I want to replace it with these values, right?
Okay.
So this value makes that. I no longer want those values. I want these values. To do so, all of my black and white adjustments are being done inside a group, right? So I'm going to tell Photoshop to give this group a command where these values are going to ignore the color and simply replace the values.
Okay.
So go to your drop menu up here for your layer blend modes. Ignore the color and replace the values, which is going to be luminosity.
Wow. Good. Nice.
Before, after. Before, after. It's a little sloppy in my painting in, but it helped me to get it done quickly. Just to
Yeah, that's good. That's a. Yeah. Wait, what was that? Was that you
somebody,
or me?
that's not me. Somebody on your end made a comment.
I don't know. There was some audio in some other language that I didn't understand.
Ah, the Chinese keeping track of us.
Maybe.
Okay, so before, after. Before, after. So Photomatix and
Yeah,
Photoshop.
very cool. Very cool.
I hope everybody. I hope hopefully that was helpful to everybody.
Yeah, I think there's a whole way of thinking. In fact, that's what you said originally. I didn't really understand what you how you meant it, but this is a thought process, is a way of thinking, and either a regular workflow or for when you want to really take control in a certain situation. Yeah, go back to the remove the color and go back to the tonal values.
Yeah.
Can you? Would you? If this were an interview, I would say, give me the shortest the shortest definition as it pertains to photography of tone as you can.
Producing three dimensionality from your digital images
Good one.
because your
Three
standard
dimensionality.
sensor does not give you three dimensionality. It gives you a flat image, unexpressive. So you're producing a very expressive in a form of three dimensionality from your standard. Or no, there's also an emotional expression. You look at the emotional feeling from this compared to that,
Yeah.
right? So we're producing emotion and depth by controlling our values.
Tone is just one of those words that has, it's just a hard, it's hard to nail down exactly how to describe it, 'cause it just depends in so much in context. And
But it's this mastery of tone that's difficult.
yeah,
So
because you can't even define, I mean, you can't even define it.
if you're going to master it in such a way that you can just start to make your colors just sing and pop and dance
Yeah,
and so forth.
indeed. Well, cool. That was really great. Thank you for
The most
sharing that. And let me, this will live in, this will live on for people to watch later. So find Stephen at chromeillusion.com.
.com.
I think I typed it in illusion the first time. And I wanted to bring up this. You probably didn't notice this, but the quote of the day: "Never use contrast sliders." Stephen Burns, 2020.
Never, never use that contrast inside of Adobe Camera Raw. And those who are on Twitch here, follow me so that every time I do a broadcast, you're notified.
Right.
Right?
All right. Well, cool. Let's break and we'll do this again. Maybe
Yes,
we'll
absolutely.
get you in for some tip. We'll do some tips and tricks
Yeah,
sometime and
yeah.
some Q and A. And yeah, if anybody has questions about, well, you know how to contact Stephen if you have questions that are Photomatix. You can contact support@hdrsoft.com as if you wish. That's a good way to do it too. I was going to try to pop up. Nobody really needs that, right?
Oh,
But just at hdrsoft.com. If you have questions about the HDR part of it, the photographing brackets, I can help you with that. The workflow and stuff that Steve was talking about. Pile on, throw them, just kill them with questions. And by the way, we're doing this in November 2020, just in case that if it's sometime later, we don't know what will be changing, but
November 9th.
hopefully the quarantine will be over and life will be a little more normal. But at any rate, thanks very much, Stephen, and everybody watching who watched for a little while or a long while and commented. Appreciate that. And yeah, till next time.
Okay,
I'm gonna hit end broadcast here and say adios.
broadcast with Twitch also.